All right, well, it is 11 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Jasper. I'm from SCORE Maine, and we're here presenting a workshop on hiring temp contractors. We're joined by Danielle Nemeth, SCORE mentor and a HR expert who is going to be talking on the subject today. She's well versed, and we also do want to thank our sponsor today, the Maine Technology Institute, for making this workshop possible. Danielle, why don't you take it away? We are recording today, like I said, and if you have any questions or need anything, feel free to use the raise hand function in the React bar or cue it in the chat. Danielle, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Jasper. Hi, I am Danielle, and we are going to be talking about the 1099 best practices and compliances today. I am doing a high-level overview. This topic seems to come up quite often when we do hiring your first employee, so we thought we would try to do a presentation on this particular topic because it generates a lot of questions. So again, my name is Danielle Nemeth. I own Anna's coaching and consulting business. I'm an HR consultant, and I am a SCORE mentor. And we'll just dig right into the contents because we have a lot to cover today. So in the chat box, I'd like to talk about or ask the question of what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of a 1099 employee? So we have a few coming in. Perfect. We think of expertise, right? We think of short-term contracts. We think of, professional people being able to do the job. So what is a 1099 contractor? And obviously it's an independent worker who provides services for specific tasks, and they work under a contract. Ironically, the name 1099 contractor comes from the IRS form of 1099, which is a form that the company you're contracted with will fill out, or the contractor will provide the company they're working with so they can report it on their taxes. So common types of 1099 employees are consultants, such as myself, or independent contractors. Those could be trainers, such as sales professionals. I know we have one out there in the presentation today. It could be an HR professional, such as myself. It could be other professionals, such as marketing and advertising professionals. And there's a wide range of independent contractors. Freelancers are also 1099s, and those could be your photographers, your interior designers. They could be a yoga instructor. They just do freelance work for a specific period of time. It could be for an hour, it could be for a couple of days or a contract, but they're also considered 1099 employees. And then we have gig workers, right? And gig workers, Gig workers are people who do short-term things such as rideshare, your Uber drivers, your delivery drivers such as DoorDash. It could be an Airbnb host, right? When we rent our Airbnb, it's for a specific couple of days or a week, and then they could be seasonal workers. Most of them are self-employed individuals that you're contracted with, and they're working for you. Most of them are either LCCs or sole proprietors. So the key differences between an employee and a contractor or a 1099 independent contractor are employment statuses. So an employee, right, they work directly for you. An independent contractor, we provide services under a specific contract with a specific period of time. When the law looks at contractors and the differences between employees and contractors, they look at control and supervision. So your employees is the employer controls how the work is done, when the work is done, where the work is performed. And then independent contractors, we have more autonomy, right? We determine how we're going to do our own work and what processes we're going to use. Taxes, payroll, and benefits. It's a big one when you're determining an independent contractor and employee. And the employer provides the benefits. They also provide the withholding of the taxes, such as Medicare taxes, Social Security taxes, and other taxes. They'll pay for the workers' comp. They're going to be paying for various different benefits, including unemployment. Independent contractors are responsible for their own taxes and their own benefits. So additionally, when you're looking at contractors, the IRS looks at who's providing the tools and the resources. So employers will provide the tools, the equipment, and the resources. They'll provide the laptops, they'll provide the tools to go out and do a job for, if you're an HVAC person. We're the independent contractor. We have our own tools. We have our own laptops. The employer can provide a laptop or allow the employee and the contractor to get into their systems if you're like an HR consultant, such as myself. But for the most part, we're using all of our own resources, all of our own tools. Job security is another piece that the IRS looks at when they're determining if indeed your employee or contractor, if the work is providing between an employer and an employee. So the employee, it's for job security, right? You hire them. It should be a long-term, stable employment that's protected under many laws. But your independent contractor has relationships, right? It's a relationship. It's a short-term relationship. It's project-based, and there's no guarantee of future work. So when using the benefits of using a 1099 employee is typically your 1099 employees are highly skilled. They know the industry. If you have a trainer, that person knows. For example, a sales trainer. You hire a sales trainer to come in to train your sales force, specifically to have their employees get some skills from that person. HR consultant, perhaps there's a project that needs to be done, an employee handbook needs to be done, and you want it done by somebody who's very well versed. You want it done by someone who knows what they're doing and is very experienced in doing those projects. So that's what you're hiring, and that's what you're paying for when you are using a 1099 employee or a 1099 contractor. Even though the rates may be a little higher than an hourly rate, you're not paying those payroll taxes and you're not paying those unemployment taxes. Your 1099ers paying those. So those are some benefits of hiring a 1099, because you're not responsible for workers' comp. You're not responsible for unemployment taxes. It's just a flat fee, and the 1099 person contractor takes care of those costs. The benefits of having a 1099 contractor is flexibility, right? You can give them a specific task and you can tell them, go do it. I just need it to be done within a month. And they should have it done and completed within a month. So those are some of the benefits, where you don't have to have a person in your office watching, reporting to you. They just, again, take a task and run, and you can hire them as needed. So they're not on your payroll for a whole year. It's specific, or they can be, but we'll talk about that a little later. But it's a specific task. Again, for specific projects, there's typically end dates. And processes. So the benefit of using a 1099 employee is also for processes, to streamline your processes. They can help you implement strategic goals. And because they're so specialized that they can put you on a fast track to getting to your goal quickly. And those are, again, some of the benefits of using 1099 contractors. But when we're using 1099 contractors, we need to have some legal considerations in place, right? Because if we are employers and we're using a 1099 contractor, we want to make sure we're classifying them correctly. And a lot of businesses get in trouble when they hire a 1099 employee or a contractor and they call it a 1099 employee, and then they treat that contractor as an employee. As a result, a lot of times they might misclassify the employee, and that can result into fines and penalties because they are dictating the work, they are managing the work. So once you start managing a 1099's work, once you start dictating how it's performed, paying them benefits, or paying them using your payroll versus a vendor check, then you can get into trouble and they can be seen as an employee. And then if the IRS gets a hold of that or finds out that you have a 1099 contract that you are treating like an employee, you can be subjected to fines and penalties. So it's pretty important to make sure you're classifying the relationship correctly. The relationship could be ongoing, but again, do not provide benefits to them. Do not give them do not give them bonuses unless it's specifically mentioned in the contract. And then make sure that you have, again, a contract in place, and we'll talk about contracts. But you also want to make sure that there's a non-disclosure agreement in place at the same time. Let's see. I know I'm covering a lot of information at this point in time, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So IRS guidelines for classifications, right? So when the IRS is trying to determine whether we are treating an employee as an employee or they are indeed a contract, they'll look at behavioral control. They'll look at how the work is done. They'll look at how you're instructing the employee. They'll look at, are you really in control of their working hours? Are you in control of their payroll or how they're getting paid? Are you telling them they need to be working from 9 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday? And then they'll look at financial control. Who controls the expenses? Is the 1099 controlling the expenses? Are they using their own tools? Or are the employer providing all of that information or all of that equipment? Relationships with contracts. That is a big one. As long as you're a 1099 contractor or an employer who's thinking about hiring a 1099, make sure you have a written contract in place. Make sure that it has a duration and the scope of the work. And then Maine, of course, Maine has their own guidelines to 1099 employees. 1099 contractors. I keep saying 1099 employees, and I apologize for that because there is no such thing as a 1099 employee. It should be a contractor. So Maine has an ABC test, and their ABC test is very similar to the IRS. It's the worker, they look at the worker. Is the worker free of control and direction, right? The worker is outside the usual course of the business entity, right? So we're not telling that employee they have to be in the office Monday through Friday between the hours of 8 and 5, and we're not providing their tools and equipment. And the worker needs to be engaged independently. They need to be, specific to a contract, and they also need to be servicing additional clients. So if I'm just working for one particular client, and that would be you as an employer, and then I'm being told what to do, when to do, how to do, then I could be considered an employee versus an independent contractor. Some additional considerations is that you should ask contractors if they have limited liability insurance. Any 1099 employee should be able to provide you some kind of insurance, whether it's an errors and emissions insurance or a liability insurance. But you should be able to ask them for a certificate of insurance. And then, and of course, some industries require licensing, right? I mean, HR consultants don't necessarily need to be licensed, but if you have somebody who is a nurse coming into your home taking care of a parent, or you have a person who may hold a certificate for an HVAC company, those you should be asking for those specific certifications from them. So when you have a 1099 contractor, you should have a specific contract language. You should have a contract and then have specific contract language. And the contract agreement should say who the parties are, have their full legal names and their contact information. You should establish the relationship, make sure the contract is clear that they are an independent contractor responsible for paying their own bills, and that they're not an employee. You should have the scope of work and the deliverables when it comes to the contract or the agreement. Clearly describe the scope of the work. For me, I do employee handbooks, so that would be my scope of work. You may have your sales trainer come in. You want him to train your sales force. That's the scope of work. So make sure it is clear. It is clear, specific to what you want that contractor to do and why you're hiring that contractor. Contract agreements should also have the payment terms, right? How is it going to be paid? Is it going to be a flat rate? Is it going to be an hourly rate? Are you going to pay per project? And when is that payment going to be received? Are you going to have it on a payment schedule, like you pay weekly, bi-weekly, or maybe completion of work? Some independent contractors take fees, half the fee up front and half the fee at the end when the work is complete. So make sure that payment terms are clearly identified in the contract. Confidentiality clause is another more language you want into the contract, specifically saying that the information is confidential, that if a contractor is going into an employer and being exposed to a lot of different things, you want to make sure that confidentiality agreement is that. Vice versa, if you're here as a 1099 and you're going into an employer, and you want to make sure that your fees, your rates of pay, your work is confidential and that they're not going to be sharing. Intellectual property. Who owns the work? And this is a good one. Who owns the work? So if I'm doing an employee handbook and I have a template, I own that template. And then I may customize it to an employer. And the employer who hired me will own the customizing that I do. Same with training, same with a sales trainer, right? And I have a sales trainer here on the presentation, so I'm using him as a great example. But same with a trainer. You put together all of this information, you put together all of the training, you own that training. But once you customize it to the employer, they own the customized piece. So this is critical to have in your contract agreement. And I would strongly advise that you do have that in there, because there can be disputes on who owns that work. And termination, or the term of the contract, you want to have the start date, the end date, and you want to have, can the contract be terminated based on different factors, whether it's a breach, whether it's unsatisfactory work conditions. So you want to ensure that the contract also has the termination clause. Everything we talked about can lead to penalties and fines if they're not classified correctly. If you're hiring an independent contractor and then you're having them work as an employee, not paying overtime and dictating their work, it could lead into a lot of different penalties and fines under both federal and state law. So this was a really quick webinar, but summaries of our conversation was, when you hire a 1099, you're hiring an expert. And despite the fact that their hourly rate may be more expensive, you're not paying all of the additional costs that go with that employee. Understanding the risks, understanding not to misclassify a 1099 as an employee to avoid paying penalties and fines. And then again, making sure you have a contract in place. And if you do have a contract in place and you do have a long-term employee or a long-term contractor, so you may have an example with that be somebody may be on maternity leave and you have someone coming in for 6 months or longer, or maybe somebody's quit and you don't want to hire the position. And so you have them come in 6 months, maybe 12 months. If you have a long-term contractor on site, be very careful to, again, not treat them as an employee. Make sure that they're paying for themselves and you're not paying their taxes. But also make sure that you're renewing that contract every 6 to 12 months. That will help protect you and clarify that they are indeed still an independent contractor by renewing that contract. And that summarizes our presentation today rather quickly. So I apologize for being rather quick, but I also wanted to have some questions and answers time, because it is it can be a complicated topic when you're talking about employees and 1099s.
Yeah, and we've got a number of great questions in the chat. We'll start off with Anna with a few questions. The first one is, what would you say the line is between management and quality control of work?
The line is between management and quality control. I'm not understanding that question really, because are you talking about quality control being a 1099 employee?
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. So I work specifically in the construction industry. So 1099ing someone to do a staircase for us or something like that. Very clear scope. What is the line between saying, here's the information you need to execute this staircase in the way that we need it done, because it's a very specific product that they're putting out. And yes, this is up to par, or no, this isn't, versus like over managing and then becoming an employee under that contract. Like, is there an issue there in that specific?
As long as you have an agreement in place, and then, if you're having a staircase built, it's okay for management to take a look at it and say, hey, I really wanted it this way, but you're hiring that person to come in and be a professional. So there really shouldn't be a line as long as you have a contract in place, as long as you're, you can oversee and look at the work, but you have to make sure that that person is providing their own tools, and do everything we're talking about. I don't see there would be an issue unless, you're paying using payroll services, or you're providing the tools to build that staircase. Of course, management, should check on the work. When I'm contracting with companies, I send them a draft of what I present to them. And then we have a working open dialogue conversation of the changes we want to make. So it would be the same thing as that. Somebody can build whatever you want build, and you guys can take a look at it, give them the specs, but in the end, they should be controlling the work, when they do the work, how they do the work, and providing their tools.
Speaking of providing the tools, Anna's next question was, can the employer buy materials for said work, say the trunks for the stairs or whatnot?
They could buy, you could buy them, right? You can have all of the tools there. You can buy the wood to build the staircase, and then you can have a contractor come in and say, here's the wood, build the staircase. They'd still be using their old tools. They'll still be setting their own hours. They'll still be doing the scope of the work, or the bulk of the work. So you can buy the wood to build the staircase. You just want to make sure you have that agreement in place, and you give them the autonomy to do the work.
Yeah, and then next question comes from Robert. What does working outside the usual course of the entity's business mean? Would you clarify that a little bit?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah. What does working outside of the usual course of the entity's business mean? I believe that means like, hiring someone for something that your business doesn't necessarily do. But Robert, if you want to clarify, you can also unmute and let us know.
Yeah, so does that mean you can't hire someone? Let me give you an example. I'm working with a company who hires people subcontract. They're not experts. He trains them to be experts. Is that legal? Can that be done?
Yeah, that can be done. To some degree, we all need training, right? So if I go into a field that I don't know, you're going to train me to some degree, right? But in the end, you're bringing me in for my expertise. So if I go into a transportation organization, you're going to train me on some of the how you do things. But in the end, it's my expertise that will perform the work. So you might say, there's new regulations
within the scope of expertise.
I'm sorry?
So that's within the scope of expertise. What does it mean to be? You had one comment, I think about your third or fourth slide in, that said something about being outside the scope of expertise. I don't know where that slide was. I just was kind of curious, because whenever you hire someone, I think you hire them within the scope, don't you?
You do hire them within the scope, but there may be some incidences where they have an expertise.
Okay.
There may be an instance where they have an expertise, or you train them on that, but there's a skill that they have that they still need from you. So I'll have to look at that, revisit that slide. Thank you for pointing that out, Robert. And I'll look at that slide, but they can still train you. You can still be trained, but in the end, you have something that they want from you that you're an expert in, right? And that's why they're hiring you as a 1099.
Another possible explanation would be that if I'm a company and I'm hiring somebody whose expertise is completely outside of my scope of business, then that's a very clear situation where they are an independent contractor, particularly if all the other criteria are met. On the other hand, if I'm hiring somebody to do exactly what half the employees of my company do, then it's not necessarily as clearly obvious that they would be an outside independent contractor.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Thank you. And he's is one of our SCORE mentors. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and that also kind of gets into Anna's next question. If the independent contractor gets enough work from an employer to not seek employment elsewhere, is that a violation of contract? Or is that like a violation of the definition of a contractor?
No, not necessarily. You could hire me to work on a project for a year, as long as we have, a clear contract in place and I'm still being paid a flat rate, or you're not taking payroll taxes out. So for example, we could hire a CEO to come in, and this happens a lot in corporations, is you need a CEO to come in and to manage cut cost, find savings. How can you do that? You can hire that person to come in for a year, 2 years, and that's their primary function, is to look at the organization as a whole and find where they can cut cost. And that, is an example of a long-term contract, but it is a contract. Or you want to make sure that a contract is in place that clearly defines the scope, the payment terms, and then you want to revisit that contract year after year or every 6 months, and be very clear about that. And as long as you're following those things, and not paying them out of your payroll, then it is fine to have somebody in there long term.
Great. And then we have a question from Chauncey asking, when the IRS is analyzing if someone is an employee or contractor, what's the standard of proof used? Is beyond a reasonable doubt or preponderance of evidence, aka more likely than not? I believe that would come down to the contract signed, correct?
It comes down to the contract sign. It comes down to who's controlling the work, who's providing. I think let me go back to that slide. But it comes down to behavioral control, right? And how the work is being done, what the financial control looks like. And then of course the relationship, again, the written contract. So when they're looking at that, that's what they're looking at. And then of course, Maine also has an additional considerations, like who is holding the insurance for that employee to be there? Do they have their own insurance, or is the employer paying the insurance? So those are some things to watch for. Again, it's really about, when the IRS takes a look at these things, it's really about who's controlling the work, how are they getting paid, right?
Yeah,
And
can I clarify on that too? So there's a lot of different check boxes they're looking for. If they find that one check box wasn't checked, does that mean, aha, it's not a contractor, it's an employee? Or if they say, well, you provided tools this one time, but the majority of the evidence supports that they're actually a contractor and not an employee. Does that kind of make more sense, right? Like if they just find one thing, then can they say that you were in violation, or does it have to be that the evidence is more supporting one or the other, if that makes sense?
I don't think one thing, right? It's again, the whole picture. And I think in the end, the IRS really wants to, the big thing is how are they getting paid? Are you taking out benefits and taxes, and are they on your payroll, or are you paying them a flat rate and they're responsible for deducting and paying those taxes? So it's not just to check the box, but that would be a big indicator of, is it really an employee or a contractor? And then of course, again, a contract in place is always great to have. But I think if you, like, for example, are providing the tools, I don't think that would be the only reason they would look at that and say, well, you provide the tools, so therefore we're giving you fines and penalties. They would look at different aspects of that before they would give you fines and penalties.
From my perspective, there's a great big gray zone between people who are clearly an independent contractor and people who are clearly an employee. If somebody is doing similar work for other companies, then that certainly leans towards there being an independent contractor on the face of it, regardless of a bunch of other minor violations of tools or supervision or whatever. As long as they're not on their payroll and doing similar work in their area of expertise for other companies, they're an independent contractor. Where it gets stickier is if they're billing you as an LLC versus an individual, and they think that because they're billing you as an LLC, that makes them an independent contractor. No, not necessarily.
I have a question. What if you have a company that the corporate side of the company is all employees, but the sales force is all subcontractors? They all pay for their own taxes and everything else, but they work for that company subcontracted as sales reps. Can they do that?
Yep. As long as as long as there's contracts in place and there's a clear understanding and the payroll, again, they're not payrolled.
How do you put an end date on the contract then, if they're just hired on ad nauseum and they stay on till they decide to leave?
Yeah, so you can put an end date year after year and then renew the contract year after year.
Should the contract be renewed every year?
Yes, the contract can be renewed every year.
Should it be, or does it have to be?
It should be, right?
Okay.
It should be. That would be my recommendations. I mean, if you have an indefinite contract, then you know, are they really employees? You know,
So ages ago, I worked for a multi-level company, and it was an insurance firm. And I hired everybody subcontract. I was the regional vice president for the company. And we literally we had like 40 agents before we were done, 4 offices. And their job, they didn't work for me. I guess they did work for me, but they paid their own taxes. They did everything else. They paid for their own licenses. It was kind of understood they were brought on board to go to work. I mean, is that okay? Or was that okay?
no, that's okay. You know, my sister owns a hair salon, and she does the business itself does the booth rentals, and the people who are renting the booth, they do their own hair. They're their own contractor. So
Okay.
even though they're there every day, they end up making their own hours, but they're there every day. They're managing their schedules. They're managing their clients. So they're managing all of that scope, and they're paying their rent to the business. So they're not employees, right? They're paying rent. Even though they're there every day, they're managing their own clients. They're managing their own time. So that's kind of maybe a poor example, but it's.
No, that was a good example. That was good.
To Robert's question, though, it's an interesting one to me. If the company trained the salespeople and provided them with the computers and set the standards for sales and the marketing message, to me,
they're
that
paid on
starts to feel more and more like an employee.
I know that's that gray area I think you were mentioning, Whit.
Yeah, there is definitely that gray area. And again, I think it would come down to payroll, who's paying them and how are they being paid and who's paying those taxes, right?
Right.
I mean, oftentimes when I go into organizations as a consultant, they give me a laptop because they don't want my laptop getting into their business. So they'll give me a laptop to work off of, to get into their systems and to work as an employee, but I'm still setting my own hours. I'm still doing, paying my own taxes. So that's an example, but they need me to be into their systems. That's confidentiality, right? Or that could be a security breach. So, and I think that's okay. So it is okay, actually. So you can have somebody like that using your systems to do the work, because I can't do the work if I'm not using their systems. Like, you could hire me to do data entry. Let's just say you're using a new HIRS system, or you're bringing a new system on board, and you need somebody to come in and enter all this information into the systems. The only way I can do that is if you're providing me the tool. Not the only way, but the secure way is that you provide me the laptop and the information so I can do the work. But there, again, there's still that contract in place. There's still, you're still paying me as a flat rate, and I'm paying my own taxes, and I hold insurance.
Right. Okay. Good.
Self-insured part seems to be, not self-insured, but you have your own insurance policy seems to be key. As well as any professional licenses that might be held in that profession. But if there are no licenses, that doesn't come into play. So the other thing, when should somebody consult an attorney or
When
tax
can,
accountant?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
When should somebody consult an attorney or tax accountant to get their advice on an odd situation?
I need you to repeat the question. I didn't quite hear you.
When should somebody consult an attorney or a tax accountant?
You should always have a 1099 should have tax accountants, right? We should be using that to make sure we're paying our taxes. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, but
Well, I'm just saying, as the employer, at what point in the gray zone should you consult an attorney or an accountant to make sure that you pass muster from their perspective?
I would bring an attorney in really to take a look at the contract, to make sure the contract is legal, to make sure it's clear, and that there is no gray area, right? It's really hard to answer the gray areas, but because there are gray areas in different courts and different people can look at it in many different ways, but it's a good question. I'll do some research on that one and get back with you on that one. But it's never hurts to consult an attorney once you engage in a contract.
When you're in doubt, do it.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely. Let's keep going. We got bunch more questions in the chat. Hopefully we can get through them in a timely manner. Paul, I guess kind of also on topic here. Heard there were changes for 1099s in 2024 that affects US based 1099s. Were there any changes this year as far as 1099 contracting?
I didn't come across any significant changes. I did look and I didn't come across it. There was some minor changes, but they weren't, the scope of what we're talking about still remains the same.
Great. Kim is wondering if you could touch a little more on liability insurance. She has general and professional liability policies for her business. She was told that she needed to have her liability policies cover 1099s. They also need additional liability policies.
Right. So there's the error admission, the error admissions insurance, and then the general liability insurance, right? So if the general liability is exactly what it is, right? If you're going on somebody's property and you get hurt, then your insurance is going to cover that. And then of course, a lot of insurances, a different coverage of insurances, errors and admission, right? Two different things. One is general liability if you get hurt, or if something happens, you break property, an employer's property, where the errors in admission, if you are doing some work and you accidentally have errors in the work that may impact them legally, then that's where your error and admissions insurance comes in.
All right. Hopefully that was good. Holly runs a painting business and subcontracts painters. How does Holly create clarity between federal and state laws?
Well, it's not really creating clarity between federal and state laws. It's being clear between the painters, right? And I think she and I talked about this yesterday. If it's the person I think it is who I told to join, but it's being clear and setting those expectations and having that contract in place, right? But if you have an employee, and I believe this is her case, she has an employee that might work the front desk and then does painting classes, I would keep them all as a an employee at that point in time and not as an independent contractor. It would be just,
Sorry,
No,
construction. I'm in construction.
oh, so, okay. Oh,
Sorry.
you're talking about painting. Sorry, I have somebody who I was talking to about art gallery work and yesterday.
I run a construction company as well, and I'm really concerned. I did have a misclassified worker 14 years ago, and it was super, super stressful. Got it sorted out, paid fines, many fines. And so I've been really twitchy ever since. I have right now the state has, there used to be a independent contractor, a subcontractor form you could fill out, and they changed it this year. And it just doesn't seem very clear to me. It's confusing. And and the rules are more strict in the state of Maine, or they're more specific, or they were years ago anyway, more specific than, and with a lot more leeway for interpretation than the federal laws. And so I'm just really, I have guys who work, I can't paint anymore. Because I'm because of injuries, but I quote jobs. I pay them just 70% of a job. I supply materials because I make it up, and I tell them, the customer needs to have this job done between this date. This is the deadline. We work to deadlines, basically. So I don't control. I do quality control. I say this is the standard of the job. This is what has to be done, and all that kind of stuff. I just am concerned because I hire these guys a lot. And I just don't want to get in trouble in terms of I'm hiring someone, like say 6 months out of the year, but I'm also working around their schedule. Oh no, I can't do that week. I've got, I'm working a job for someone else, or I'm doing my own job. Then I'm like, cool, okay. I just contact them to ask them to schedule, but I'm just afraid that because I hire them as much as I do, I just don't want them. Is that where a contract would come in and be clear to make clarity? I'm afraid of getting caught between the two, because the state will report you to the feds.
right.
And the
Right.
feds go with what the state says. Sorry to be so, I'm sorry if I'm not being very clear. I'm not always a good talker.
No, that's okay. And I have some background noise in where I am, so I'm having a hard time hearing as well.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So if you're hiring them and they're a duration, you are hiring them for a duration, you can use them over and over again. You could own a bunch of apartment buildings and have a painter come in and use them over and over again, as long as, again, you've got a project, right? You have a clear scope of work. They're going to paint this apartment building. You have a start and end date, and then you have, you're paying them a flat fee, right? So you should be fine. I mean,
Yeah,
I would definitely
so it's up to them to determine, if they are sick that day and they work slower, they make a less hourly rate. I mean, I'm basically like, here is $1,000 for this job. Do you want it?
Yeah.
So it's up to them to work as fast or as slowly as they want.
right. And they're paying their own
Come in and say,
taxes.
you know what? You were supposed to caulk all this. It was in the quote, because I'll send them the quote that I send to the customer for them to see what the scope of the job is.
Okay, yeah, I don't see where I don't see where you would get in trouble for that, because again, you have the scope, you have clear start date, you have the salary expectations laid out, they're setting their own hours. So I don't see where you would get in trouble.
Okay.
Then,
I'm so twitchy.
yeah, I know, and I can understand why you're nervous. But again, if you have it, you're sending an invoice, you're providing them the scope, I think you're fine.
Okay. And I do send them a scope. It's not, do I have to print it out and have them sign it every single time? Is that what that's about?
It's good to have them sign it. It's always
Okay.
good to have their signature on it.
Okay.
If they're,
That's what makes it a contract, right? When both
Right.
sides.
Yeah. I've been a kind of handshaky kind of person. There's a ton of the people who have been working with me have been working with me for 10 on and off for 10 and 15 years. So, but I'm thinking I should button my, tighten everything up and not be so groovy.
Yeah, and when you're providing them that scope of work, have them sign off on it, right? Start date,
Okay.
end date, and again, I'm not an attorney, so if you're,
I have one now who can
Oh,
write
that's
the
good.
contracts for me or put
Good.
whatever boilerplate I need to stick into each scope of work. So,
Right. And I should clarify that I'm not providing legal advice. I'm just giving a high level overview of contract language, of misclassifications. It's really awareness to help employers not misclassify employees or contractors.
Maybe I got an example that might help Holly. I do sales training. I do sales training with companies. And I've got a company I've been working with since 2015. Every time I do a seminar with them, it's a brand new contract. Even though it's the exact same training I've been providing forever, it's still a brand new contract because there are new people who are attending. He may have some little intricacies that he wants different, so I would stipulate that in the contract. But whether or not it was, I mean, exactly precisely the same thing, I create a new contract for every single training.
okay, it sounds like that's what I should do. So
I don't know if
basically,
that,
I provide a quote for every single job, so there's not much more to turn it into a contract.
and the contract has depth, scope, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah. Great tips there. We've got a few more questions if we can get through them. Maybe a little more rapid fire as we're getting close to the wire here, but we can always run a little over if everyone's comfortable with it. Either way. Wendy's wondering if, on the flip side, do you have any recommendations from the contractor's perspective for providing a draft contract to the client? Is it best practice for the contractor to initiate a contract?
I always initiate contracts, and Bob, you can, and I love that Whit and Bob is on here and we can be pretty collaborative. But I always provide a contract with the scope of work. Even if it's a small job, I always provide a contract. Because, I want to make sure and make it clear that I own the templates and the work that I'm doing. So it's for my protection as well, right?
Yeah, great. Always important there. Lauren, if you want to unmute and ask your question now that we're to you.
Sure, sure. So you say not to use payroll to pay both the employees and the 1099s, but there's payroll systems out there that classify who's on the payroll, and they specify who's 1099 and who's a W-2. So what do you mean by, is there a specific way, if you're not using one of those systems, to pay?
You pay employees on the payroll systems. If your payroll system also has like vendor management and can pay vendors or accounts payables, then you can certainly use that that HIRS system or that payroll system to pay it. The difference is payroll is different from accounts payable, right? And payroll is, again, the taxes, the benefits, all of that being deducted, where the 1099 is not. So if you have a payroll system that also pays out vendors or 1099s, then yeah, you can absolutely use that. So it wasn't that you couldn't use the same system. It was just being very clear on what an employee is and how to pay that employee and what to pay on that employee versus what to pay on a 1099 or what not to pay on a 1099.
Okay, so I'm guessing the system just kind of uses all of it at the same time, but they classify it different and they go on different sheets, I guess. But I do have one other quick question. I'm no lawyer either. I have taken some paralegal courses, but is there any specific terms that need to be included in a 1099 contract? Because I like to write my own contracts, and of course I would like to make sure that they're all legal, but I like simple terms. So what do I need to pay specific attention to not leave out anything that's crucial as far as what's legal?
Yeah, so I believe you're going to get a copy of this slide, and in the slide, it tells you the highlights of what you should have in there. And again, we go back to the full name and addresses, you go back to the scope of work, you go back to the start and end date, you go back to how payment terms. So in the slide that you're going to get, we'll have all of that information in there. And I'm also sending out a checklist. I have to send it to Jasper, but I'm also sending out a checklist of 1099, to take a look at to avoid misclassifications. So Jasper will be sending that out when he sends out a copy of this presentation. And if you go through the presentation, we hit the highlights of the contract, the topics of the contract, clauses that should be in there if you want to create your own.
Okay, so I don't have to put all the, fine print legal jargon in there.
Yeah, no, you just, again, I hit the high topics at high level, but, obviously you can put what you want in there. But the agreement should have what I highlighted as a minimum.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Couple more questions here. We have one from Wayne. Can you briefly talk about 1099 NEC and W-9 reporting requirements by a hiring entity? What is the hiring entity responsible for providing to the contract, and what do they need to provide to the state and Fed? Are there additional reporting requirements?
No, not that I'm aware of. I think that you have to, obviously, what you're reporting to the feds, your contractor will give you a 1099 form with all of their information and whatever the payments, that's what you need to report. But I'm not sure I'm answering the question. Again, having a little hard time hearing. So if you can maybe repeat the question.
Yeah, so I believe it's talking about, W-9 reporting, tax reporting for hiring a contractor. Is the hiring entity of a contractor responsible for providing, and what would the contractor necessarily need to provide as far as reporting?
Yeah, so again, the contractor just provides you the 1099 form with the IAN number. And then you obviously, there's a form, I believe it says SSR 8 form that you would fill out with your taxes. And that's what you pay that's what you would, as you're doing your taxes, you'd fill that out to what you paid the contractor.
Great. Yeah. And let's see, we have one more from let's see, well, John had a question, but it looks like it disappeared. How about Paul? Is there an office within the Maine state government that investigates and enforces classification? Is there a specific group to be looking out for in this kind of thing?
DOL, Department of
Yes.
Labor. Right.
Yeah. And so Rebecca and let's see, someone else. I guess Rebecca asked if we have any SCORE resources or lawyers we recommend for this kind of thing. I can include our referral list that SCORE sends to clients. It's also a great time to apply for a SCORE mentor. You can do so on our website for free at score.org. We help with that. I don't believe if we necessarily provide templates for that, but we can definitely help with the process. Danielle, I don't know if you've worked SCORE mentoring with hiring contractors with a client.
I haven't as far as SCORE goes. But we can mentor. We certainly can mentor, and we certainly have resources that we can tap on. We have co-mentors, right, that have a legal background, but we certainly can, if you go through SCORE, we certainly can help in the process.
Great. And looks like Whit touched on John's questions in the chat. talking about the definitions of them as well. So if anyone else has any questions, we've got about a minute or so left. I believe I've gotten to everyone in our chat here, and if I didn't, it looks like Wit did.
Thank
Again,
you, Whit.
great. Yeah, thanks as always, Wit, always the resourceful one. And in any case, I guess in that case, one way or the other, thanks to everyone for joining us today.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate Danielle for putting on this presentation and Robert and Whit for providing some extra information and sounding on this. Want to plug us here at SCORE one more time. If you don't already have a SCORE mentor, it's free and confidential. You can apply for one on our website, score.org. It's as easy as entering your zip code. And I wanted to thank the Maine Technology Institute once more for sponsoring this event. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and stay warm and dry out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good